Kelly, around 25 at the time, living in a cramped apartment with my two closest friends, Rachel and Tara. Not just roommates, more like our own little alliance, three of us against everything outside that door. Our place felt like a bubble where we could finally relax. Walls covered with posters, shelves stacked with books. We all agreed with every corner, basically screaming the same message about how the world worked, felt safe. There felt like our one place where we didn't have to deal with the usual crap from guys. Rachel was the youngest of us, super passionate about everything, big heart. Believed deeply in what we talked about. Sometimes a little too. Trusting though, Tara was the practical one, always calculating things, always thinking 2 moves ahead. She understood systems, rules, loopholes, and me. I was the one who kept everyone focused. The reminder of why we stuck to our beliefs in the first place, the glue holding our little trio together. None of us had fancy careers or anything, mostly service jobs and retail shifts, long hours dealing with customers and bosses, half of which seemed determined to remind us we were women. Every shift felt like running a gauntlet. We'd come home exhausted, sit around the kitchen table at night, venting about the day. Little comments from male customers, condescending managers, just constant tiny annoyances stacking up. Our apartment was the only place we could finally drop the armor. Then things started going sideways. At first, it was small stuff. Rachel losing a shift here, me getting my hours cut, their prices for everything climbing higher every week, our paychecks staying exactly the same. We started trimming expenses wherever we could, cheap groceries canceled, streaming accounts cut back on takeout. Felt like trying to plug a leaking dam with duct tape. No matter what, we did, the pressure kept building. I still remember when the first notice showed up. Letter slid under the door, polite tone but firm message from our landlord. A woman named Diane basically saying rent hadn't come through yet. We scraped together what we could and paid it late, but we all knew that was just buying time. Next month came around and we were even worse off. That's when Diane decided to show up in person, standing right there in our living room, arms folded like a bank manager. She wasn't mean about it, just very matter of fact. She had a mortgage and expenses too. Our problems didn't change her math. She laid out the situation. Real simple, rent was late again. She couldn't keep letting it slide. 2 choices either. We were out by the end of the month, or we filled the empty spare bedroom with another tenant to split the cost. That suggestion hit us like a brick. Bringing a stranger into our space felt awful. Rachel looked like she might cry right there, saying it would destroy everything about the apartment. Tara immediately started doing mental calculations, trying to find some other solution, but every number she ran ended the same way. We didn't have enough money. I tried arguing with Diane, explaining how things had been lately. Hoping she'd give us more time. She barely budged, said she didn't care who we found, as long as they passed the background check and paid on time, then gave us exactly 7 days to figure it out. That week sucked constant stress hanging over us. We posted listings online trying to find another woman. Roommate barely got any responses. The few who messaged either ghosted us or seemed completely unreliable day after day. Ticking closer to the deadline, panic slowly setting in. Then my phone rang one afternoon. Diane calling sounded weirdly satisfied with herself. Told me she might have solved our problem. Said she had someone interested in the empty room. I felt this huge wave of relief. At first asked her what the person was like. There was this awkward pause, then she said, the name was Jason. I asked if she meant like a woman named Jason or something. She chuckled. Nope, Jason a guy. My stomach dropped immediately, I told her. Absolutely not. No chance we were not living with some random dude conversation. Over her voice instantly went icy, said the applicant already cleared the background. Check steady job, ready to pay deposit. Plus first month immediately. Then she mentioned the housing laws. Said she couldn't legally reject someone just because he was male. And then she dropped the final line. Basically told me we could either accept him as a roommate or she'd approve his application to rent the whole unit after we got evicted. She knew we were stuck. Complete checkmate. Either share our home with a man or lose the apartment entirely. I hung up and told Rachel and Tara everything room went nuclear. Rachel actually started crying, saying the idea alone made her feel invaded. Already. Tara was furious too, but mostly at the situation itself. The economy. The fact we were trapped by money. She called it a rigged system for me. It felt like cold anger settling in, like proof of everything we always talked about. Even our own apartment wasn't safe from it. Power and money forcing us to bend. The next couple days were awful, just waiting for this guy to show up. We finally agreed that if we were being forced into this, we would control the rules, our place, our conditions. Moving day came, all three of us sitting in the living room, waiting. Diane arrived with him to finish paperwork. And honestly, he wasn't anything, like I expected. I had pictured some loud frat-type guy, cocky and obnoxious, but Jason was quiet, looked exhausted, honestly wearing worn jeans and a simple t-shirt, heavy work boots, hands rough and scraped up like he worked with tools all day, grease under his fingernails. He barely spoke, mostly just nodded when Diane asked questions, short answers. Never really looked directly at us, almost like he was trying to make himself invisible, like he didn't want to take up space somehow. That made me trust him, even less, felt like an act, like he was pretending to be harmless. Waiting to drop the mask, later, once Diane left, we called him into the living room for a meeting. He stood near the doorway. Instead of sitting down, like he didn't want to step too far inside, I took the lead, speaking holding a sheet of paper in my hand, told him if this arrangement was going to work, we had some house rules to protect our space. He just watched me quietly face unreadable. I looked down at the paper and started reading the list. We had written our official roommate agreement, first rule, on the list. He wasn't supposed to start conversations with any of us if talking needed to happen. We'd be the ones to start it. Second rule, no guests in the apartment, especially not other guys. Our place wasn't turning into some dude hangout. Third rule covered the bathroom, 10 minutes. Max in the morning, we all had schedules and nobody wanted delays. Rachel jumped in and added another one. Toilet seat stays down, at all times, no exceptions. He just nodded slowly after that. One like he was checking boxes in his head. Then I moved to the last point, the one Tara had helped design. I explained that sharing space meant acknowledging social imbalances. So, besides his normal third of the utilities, he'd also be paying a small extra fee of $50 monthly patriarchy tax. Told him it was compensation for the extra emotional energy we'd spend, living with a man and also balancing out his heavier use of shared equipment. Things like the washer and the kitchen appliances. Tara had written that explanation. And honestly, it sounded pretty airtight. I was waiting for the pushback, figured this was where the real personality would show. Usually when men got confronted about privilege, they snapped back, argued, got defensive, but he didn't do any of that. He just stood there quietly, eyes moving from me to Rachel to Tara. Then he let out this tired little breath, said one word. Okay. That was it. No debate, no complaints. He asked if the list was finished. I was so caught off guard I just nodded. He reached over, took the paper out of my hand, walked over to the kitchen counter, signed his name at the bottom, without hesitation, handed it back. Then he went down the hallway into his room, door closed behind him. The three of us just stood there staring at each other, completely stunned, like we couldn't believe how easily that worked, Rachel guessed. Maybe he was intimidated by us three against one. Tara figured he probably needed housing so badly, he'd agree to anything. My theory was different. I thought he understood the situation, knew he was the outsider here, and accepted the cost of that. Either way, we suddenly felt like we'd turned a bad hand into a win. We were still in control of the apartment. First week after, that was strangely quiet. Jason might as well have been a ghost. He left early every morning before any of us were awake, boots thudding softly down the hall front door, clicking shut. Then nothing. All day he didn't come back until late evening, most nights, and when he did, he went straight to his room, door closed again. Sometimes we'd hear faint movement in there, but never loud enough to bother anyone. He cooked late at night, after we were already asleep. We'd wake up the next morning, and the only proof he'd used the kitchen was one clean plate and a fork sitting neatly in the drying rack. He followed every single rule exactly the way we wrote them, almost too perfectly. Honestly, it was a little unsettling. The extra $50 showed up on the kitchen table in cash on the first of the month. Right on time, we slowly started relaxing about the whole thing. Maybe it wouldn't be such a disaster after all. He was basically just a quiet source of rent money. We had our space. He stayed in. His barely any overlap, life started going back to normal. Evenings at the kitchen table again, talking about work, venting about customers, supporting each other. Like always, eventually we even started joking about him calling him our pet tenant who lived in the spare room. First real problem showed up about a month. Later started with the kitchen sink, drain getting slower every day, water sitting longer than it should. Then one night, it just stopped draining completely. Sink filled with cloudy, greasy water that wouldn't move at all. Tara noticed it first. She's the one with the sensitive nose. Said we needed to fix it right away because the smell was getting nasty. My first thought was calling Diane, but Tara reminded us the lease said clogged drains were the tenant's responsibility. Plumbers cost money. Money we definitely didn't have. Rachel suggested waiting a few days. Maybe it would clear itself. Somehow, I shot that down immediately. No way we were calling some guy to come fix our sink. Felt like admitting we couldn't handle basic stuff ourselves. We were independent adults. How hard could a clogged drain be? So we tried dealing with it. Ourselves, grabbed the plunger, first pumped at the drain. For several minutes nothing changed, then boiling water, still nothing. Rachel found some online trick with baking soda and vinegar. We dumped it in, all it did was bubble and make the smell worse. An hour passed like that. 3 of us standing in the kitchen getting more irritated by the minute. Finally Tara suggested taking apart the pipe. Under the sink said, the blockage might be stuck. There sounded reasonable. Problem was, the plastic fitting underneath was screwed on insanely tight. Each of us tried twisting it, hands slipping, no movement at all. Frustration kept building. We started pulling harder, then suddenly crack, loud plastic snap. A thin drip of water started leaking from the pipe. Then the drip turned into a pulsing stream, disgusting gray sink water pouring straight onto the floor. The smell hit. Immediately we all panicked, grabbing towels and throwing them down, but they soaked through almost instantly. Rachel was freaking out, saying the neighbors downstairs were going to get flooded kitchen floor, turning into a shallow swamp in the middle of the chaos. I grabbed my phone, called the only person I could think of. Our friend Marcus, one of the few guys we actually trusted. He'd been part of our activist circles for years, always supportive, always understood where we were coming from. I told him what happened. He said he'd head over right away. Maurice showed up about 20 minutes later, walked into the kitchen, and stopped to look around. Floor basically turned into a shallow swamp of disgusting gray water towels everywhere. Rachel still panicking, Tara scooping water into a bucket with a dustpan, like her life depended on it. Maurice stood there with his arms folded, studying the scene like it was some kind of art installation, instead of looking at the broken pipe. He looked at us, then he started talking, said the whole situation was a perfect symbol of late-stage capitalism collapsing under its own contradictions. Said the plumbing system itself came from patriarchal industrial structures, and it wasn't surprising those systems were now failing us. He said, our attempt to repair it ourselves was actually a powerful act of resistance while he was giving this whole speech. Tara was still frantically shoveling water into the bucket filling up faster than she could empty it. I tried to listen to Maurice, really did, trying to follow the bigger philosophical point he was making, but it was hard to focus over the constant sound of water splashing on tile. Then the back door opened, Jason stepping inside. After work, he stopped immediately in the doorway, eyes scanning the whole disaster. Kitchen floor, flooded, 3 of us scrambling around. Maurice waving his hands mid-lecture. Jason didn't say a word, just looked at the broken pipe spraying water everywhere, then looked at us, then turned around and walked back out the door. That pissed me off instantly. My first thought was, of course he's leaving, just walking away from the problem. Classic move, avoid responsibility. Maurice didn't even notice he had been there. He was now talking about dismantling the cultural concept of plumbing, entirely about how infrastructure itself reflected oppressive hierarchies. About a minute later, the back door opened again. Jason walked in, carrying a big, heavy metal toolbox. He walked straight past all of us without saying anything, like we weren't even part of the scene, dropped to one knee in the puddle. On the floor, didn't seem to care. His jeans were getting soaked. First thing he did was slide a bucket under the leaking pipe. Then he pulled a wrench out of the toolbox, reached under the sink to a valve none of us had even noticed. One smooth twist. The stream of water slowed immediately, then slowed again, then stopped completely. Kitchen suddenly quiet, just the sound of dripping towels. Maurice froze mid-sentence. Jason didn't react to him at all. He removed the cracked plastic fitting from the pipe, looked at it for a second, then stood up and walked down the hall to his room. Came back with a small replacement piece and a roll of sealing tape, knelt back down, and got to work. Quick, efficient movements, barely making any noise. In a few minutes, the broken section was replaced. Then he pulled this long, flexible metal cable out of the toolbox, fed it down the pipe. Inside the wall, worked it back and forth, a few times, pulled it out slowly. Huge disgusting clump of hair and sludge stuck to the end. Rachel made a gagging noise. Jason wiped the mess off with a paper towel, ran the cable through once more, just to be sure, then reassembled, the pipe tightened everything down, turned the valve again. Then he turned on the faucet, water swirled around the sink and disappeared instantly down the drain. Perfect gurgling sound. Sink completely fixed. Whole operation probably took 15 minutes. He stood up, wiped his hands on a rag from the toolbox, looked down at the soaked kitchen floor, walked over to the corner and grabbed the mop. Started cleaning the mess like it was just another chore, mopping, steadily wringing the mop into the bucket. None of us said anything. We were just watching. Morris finally cleared his throat, said something awkward about how it was interesting to observe traditional masculine roles being performed. Jason didn't even acknowledge he existed once. Most of the water was gone. He put the mop back where it belonged, picked up the toolbox, started heading down the hallway as he passed by. Tara quietly said, "Thanks." He stopped for a second, gave the smallest nod imaginable, then walked into his room, door closed again, the kitchen was clean, the sink worked, problem gone. Just like that. Maurice tried to restart his speech, but the moment was dead. He muttered something about needing to meet someone, then left a few minutes later. That night, the apartment felt weirdly quiet. None of us sat around the table like usual. We just finished cleaning the last damp spots and went to our rooms. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling irritated, really irritated. Actually, he had fixed the whole thing without saying a word. Like it was nothing. Felt like he was silently showing us up, like a demonstration of competence. We didn't ask for some kind of smug display of tool-based problem-solving, toxic masculinity with a wrench. At least that's what I told myself. But another thought kept sneaking in. Communication and discussion had gotten us a flooded kitchen and a lecture. His tools and brute force had gotten us a working sink in 15 minutes. I pushed that thought away. Immediately told myself it was just a lucky situation. We'd simply been unprepared next time we'd handle it ourselves. Still, I noticed something different over the next few days. Tara got quieter than usual, and sometimes I'd catch her glancing at Jason when she thought nobody was paying attention, like she was rethinking something. It bothered me, felt like a tiny crack forming in the wall of our little fortress, and I hated it. The sink incident left this weird tension hanging in the apartment, like a question had been asked out loud, and nobody wanted to answer it on the surface. Everything went back to normal, but underneath things felt different. Tara definitely stopped making sarcastic comments about him, and whenever I tried bringing up how incompetent men usually were, she'd just go quiet and change the subject. Rachel looked confused about the whole thing. She still believed in everything we believed, but she'd seen the problem happen, and she'd seen it get fixed, simple cause and effect, which didn't fit neatly with the narrative we usually talked about. I could feel our unity slipping a little, so I started pushing harder to keep us focused. I framed the sink disaster as a lesson, said it proved how society trains women to depend on male skills, and the solution was obvious. We should sign up for a basic plumbing class, learn the skills, ourselves become fully independent. That was the angle I tried to sell them on. Tara gave me this flat stare when I finished my little speech, asked if we should also sign up for wiring classes and drywall repair while we were at it. Tone dripping with sarcasm, I ignored that and doubled down. Started explaining how Jason fixing the sink without saying anything was actually a subtle power move, a silent way of asserting dominance, a classic example of toxic masculinity, expressing control through competence. Rachel nodded a little while I talked, but she didn't look as convinced as before. Tara didn't argue. She just stood up and walked out of the room. Halfway through, I could feel things slipping, like our shared worldview was starting to wobble. Tiny cracks forming in the foundation of our little apartment. Bubble, a couple months went by after that fall rolled in hard. One of those damp, miserable seasons where the cold sticks to your bones, rain almost every day, wind pushing through every crack in the old building. One Tuesday night, everything went dark. No warning, lights on 1 second, then total blackness the next. Not just our place either. The whole block lost power, streetlights gone, buildings dark. At first it felt almost exciting. We lit a few candles and gathered in the living room, kinda like an accidental camping trip, but the novelty faded fast. The hours dragged on. Our apartment was old and poorly insulated without heat. The temperature dropped fast, really fast. After a while, you could actually see your breath in the candlelight. We piled every blanket we owned around ourselves, still freezing. Rachel started getting scared. She hated cold weather. To begin with, kept asking how long blackouts usually lasted. Tara was trying to take inventory of food, opening cabinets with a phone, flashlight. Turns out we didn't have much that didn't require cooking, mostly crackers and a depressing half bag of chips. I tried to keep morale up, talked about how maybe this was a chance to disconnect from technology, reconnect with each other. Some wholesome nonsense like that. 3 hours later, nobody was buying it anymore. We were cold, hungry, miserable. Then someone suggested calling Marcus. I dialed him. He picked up immediately, sounding concerned, said his power was out too, but promised he'd come by and bring some supplies that gave us a little hope. Maybe he had flashlights or actual food, or some idea how to deal with the cold. About an hour later, he showed up. His supplies turned out to be a bag of kale chips and one big bottle of kombucha. Also brought his acoustic guitar, said during difficult moments it was important to maintain spiritual balance. Suggested we sit in a circle, hold hands, and meditate on generating inner warmth together. Rachel just stared at him, shivering so hard she couldn't even respond. Tara looked like she was about 5 seconds away from throwing him out the window. I tried to stay diplomatic, suggested maybe we needed something a little more practical. Marcus looked genuinely disappointed in me, said I was neglecting spiritual resilience, then launched into this long speech about how the centralized electrical grid symbolized patriarchal power. Structures claimed the blackout was actually an opportunity to reconnect with decentralized eco-feminist living, while he was still talking. Jason's bedroom door opened. Everyone turned. He stepped into the hallway wearing a thick flannel shirt, holding a compact but powerful flashlight beam, swept slowly around the room, landing on our sad little candles. He didn't say anything to us, just walked over to the window, facing the street, pulled the curtain aside and looked outside. Stood there a few seconds, then checked the other windows. The same way came back into the living room, ran his hand along the bottoms of the window frames where cold air was leaking through, then quietly went back to his room. We heard him rummaging around for a moment. He returned carrying 2 old heavy blankets and a roll of duct tape. Went straight to the worst window, tore strips of tape, sealed the blankets tight along the edges of the frame, making a thick barrier against the draft. Difference was immediate. The icy air that had been pouring into the room basically stopped. Marcus paused his lecture, mid-sentence watching, with a slight frown, muttered something about how sealing ourselves in carried troubling symbolism. Nobody paid attention to him. Jason finished insulating the living room windows, then went back to his room again. Came out a minute later, carrying this small metal device turned out to be a camping stove. Also had a metal kettle and a couple bottles of water. Set everything up on the kitchen counter, lit the burner. Few minutes later, the kettle started whistling. Sound filled the dark apartment. He grabbed some mugs from the cabinet, scooped instant coffee into 3 of them, poured the hot water, walked over and handed 1 mug to me, 1 to Rachel, 1 to Tara. Didn't make one for Marcus. The warmth from that mug in my frozen hands felt incredible, honestly. One of the best sensations I've ever experienced. The hot coffee tasted even better, like warmth spreading through my whole body. Rachel held her mug with both hands, like it was priceless, eyes watering from relief. Jason went back to his room again, came out carrying 2 thick, high-tech sleeping bags, unrolled them on the floor, handed 1 to Rachel, 1 to Tara, just gestured for them to climb in. Rachel didn't hesitate for a second, slid inside and zipped it up, let out this long, happy sigh as warmth started returning to her body. Tara followed right after Jason looked over at me, still wrapped in my thin blanket, holding my coffee in both hands. He didn't hand me a sleeping bag, wasn't mean about it, just simple math. He had 2, and he gave them to the 2 people who weren't leading the anti-guy committee in the apartment. Then he picked up his flashlight again, walked back down the hallway door to his room, shut quietly behind him. Living room stayed silent after that, just the sound of us sipping hot coffee in the candlelight. Marcus was still standing there, holding his guitar, looking like he had absolutely no role in the situation anymore, like someone who showed up to the wrong play. He tried to recover a little dignity, said something along the lines of, well, I suppose relying on fossil fuels and mass-produced camping equipment is one way to respond to this. Tara's head slowly popped out of her sleeping bag, The look she gave him could have frozen steel voice completely icy. When she spoke, told him maybe he should head home, said his spiritual harmony lecture was giving her a migraine. Marcus looked genuinely stunned, like he'd just been slapped. He glanced over at me expecting backup. I just stared down into my coffee mug. Didn't say a word, had absolutely nothing to defend him with. He left a few minutes later, looked hurt and confused the whole way out. The three of us stayed in the living room that night, Rachel and Tara warm inside those thick sleeping bags, me wrapped in every blanket we owned, still shivering a little. The electricity finally came back, sometime in the middle of the night. Lights flickered on, heater kicked back to life. But the real damage had already happened. Our worldview had just been tested against something very simple: cold air and basic survival, and it lost badly. Marcus, our carefully chosen good ally, brought speeches and kale chips. Jason, the quiet guy we didn't want there, brought heat, coffee, and solutions hard to ignore, that kind of comparison. After that night, the whole atmosphere in the apartment shifted. The resistance basically ended. Rachel started being openly friendly with Jason. Simple stuff, saying good morning when they passed in the hallway, thanking him if he held the door open. Tara changed too. Started cleaning the entire kitchen instead of just her own dishes. Little unspoken acknowledgement that he was part of the household. Now I was the last one still holding the line, couldn't bring myself to admit the whole thing had cracked. So I mostly avoided him, spent more time in my room, kept conversations short, pretended nothing had changed. Problem was the tension between me and the other two kept growing. They were adjusting to reality. I was still clinging to the old version of things. Then about a month later, the final embarrassing moment happened. Late night, way past midnight. Rachel and Tara already asleep. I'd been sitting in the living room, reading, finally got up to head back to my bedroom, closed the door behind me. The handle made this weird little click. I tried turning it. Nothing, tried again. Still, nothing. Old. Lock mechanism had jammed. Somehow my bedroom door was stuck, completely locked. My phone was on the nightstand inside, keys in my jacket pocket wallet, everything. And there I was, standing in the hallway, in pajamas, with nothing. I tried shaking the handle, pushed the door harder, jiggled the latch, no movement at all. A wave of cold panic rolled through me. I was locked out of my own room. First thought was maybe just sleep on the couch and deal with it in the morning. But the idea of explaining that humiliation to Rachel and Tara later felt unbearable, so I quietly knocked on Tara's door. Took a few tries before she woke up. She came out groggy and confused, but once she understood the situation, she tried the handle too. Same result. Door wasn't budging. She grabbed her laptop, and my stomach sank immediately because I already knew what the next step would be. Message. Marcus, my hands were literally shaking while I typed out the explanation. Few minutes later, he replied, and somehow his response made things worse instead of advice. He started analyzing the situation like a philosophy class, wrote something like, "The door represents a boundary, a constructed barrier. Being locked out might be the universe inviting you to examine the barriers you've created around yourself. Perhaps, instead of opening the door, you should try to question what a door even represents." I just stared at Marcus's message on the screen. Question what a door represents. I was standing barefoot in a cold hallway in pajamas, locked out of my own bedroom, and that was his brilliant advice. Tara leaned over my shoulder and read. It didn't comment, didn't laugh. She just slowly closed the laptop. Then she looked at me, then her eyes drifted down the hallway toward Jason's door. I knew exactly what she was thinking, and I hated it instantly. I whispered, "No, we can't do that." Tara looked straight at me, her face tired in a way I hadn't seen before, like she was exhausted from arguing with reality. She said quietly, "Kelly, stop. Just stop." Then she turned and walked down the hallway. Soft knock on Jason's door. Felt like the longest walk of shame I'd ever witnessed. My walk of shame. Technically, few seconds later, the door opened. Jason standing there half awake, squinting at the hallway. Light, wearing gym shorts and nothing else, looked like he'd been dead asleep a moment ago. Tara explained the situation, quietly pointed toward my stuck door. He listened without interrupting, face calm and unreadable, like always, just nodded, one step back into his room. For a second came out holding something in his hand, looked like a plastic card, maybe an old gift card or something, walked straight over to my bedroom door, didn't even glance at me, slid the card into the crack between the door and frame, right near the latch, wiggled it gently a few times, then click soft. Little sound, handle turned. Door opened my sacred personal space. The room I'd been locked out of opened in about 3 seconds, by the same guy I'd spent months resenting. He handed the card back to Tara, then finally looked at me, quick tired glance. Not smug, not judgmental, just tired. Then he turned around, went back into his room, door closed again. Whole interaction lasted maybe 30 seconds. And there, I stood in the doorway of my now open room, feeling like the floor had disappeared under me. All the theories, all the arguments, all the speeches I'd made completely useless against a jammed lock and a piece of plastic. That moment was the end of it. For me, nothing left to defend. Reality had already made its point. Next morning, the apartment felt different somehow, lighter. Rachel and Tara were already in the kitchen when I came out. Both of them gave me small, sympathetic smiles. Neither said, "I told you so." They didn't need to. Later that afternoon, while Jason was at work, I walked over to the wall where we'd pinned up the roommate agreement. Tara and Rachel watched quietly. I pulled the paper off the wall, tore it into 4 pieces, dropped the scraps into the trash. Next month, when rent and utilities were due, I put Jason's portion on the table like usual, but this time I placed an extra $50 bill beside it when he came home that evening. He walked into the kitchen, saw the money, paused for a second, looked at me. I met his eyes and gave a small nod. He picked up the cash, slipped it into his wallet, and went back to his room. No words exchanged, wasn't a truce. It was me admitting defeat. Life in the apartment slowly settled into a new routine. After that, we didn't suddenly become best friends or anything that was never going to happen, but things became normal. We were just roommates sharing space. Rachel sometimes cooked a little extra dinner and left a plate on the counter for him. Tara once asked him to help move a heavy cabinet she'd bought. He helped without hesitation. No complaints. I started treating him like a regular person. 2 simple things. Saying hello when we passed in the hallway, asking if he needed anything from the grocery store. When I went out, he was always polite, still quiet, still mostly kept to himself. But it didn't feel hostile anymore. That was just who he was. A quiet guy who worked hard and liked his space. We had spent months treating him like some kind of symbol, like he represented every bad thing we believed about the world. But he wasn't a symbol. He was just a person. And in the end, his quiet competence and basic decency taught us more than all the blogs and theory threads we'd read for years. He never rubbed it in, never mentioned the sink, never mentioned the blackout, never mentioned the locked door. He didn't have to. He just lived his life normally, and somehow that alone dismantled our entire worldview, piece by piece, without him even trying. Most humbling lesson I've ever learned. We were wrong, simple as that. We were just wrong.